see, I've taken the engine apart, which I showed you in pictures earlier. Right now, I actually am working on this motor. You can see I've shined up the commutator and the brushes, so I'm in the process of figuring out how to isolate the motor. It actually looks like it's going to be pretty easy. Just be a matter of isolating those springs there, which hold the brush mounts into place. The mechanism here is actually in really good shape. It runs pretty smoothly. I'm going to oil it up a little bit. We took apart the worm gear thing, or the worm gear casing, I guess would be the proper term, and replace this piece here, which looks like basically all I need to do is get some gas line for a nitro RC car, so I'll just do that. So anyway, it looks like this thing's coming apart well, so we'll keep you tuned, and as I work on it I will have more to show you. Shots, I showed you pictures of the motor being taken apart. What I did is I basically took apart the brushes and the commutator, and I took a wire brush from a Dremel tool and shined everything up, cleaned it up. So now I have the motor. As you can see, I've insulated it. It's kind of hard to see because my camera is not the greatest and it doesn't do good with the close-ups of small things. But what I did is I took wire from, or the insulation from wire, just your plain old wire, and slid it over the top of the spring that holds the brushes in place. So as you can see, we got it working. Looking pretty good there. So we do have it working. So the next part, and I do have it insulated now, so the next part will be figuring out the amp draw so that I can figure out what type of decoder I need to connect this into. Alright, so you can see here that the motor is now ready to go. I did have to resolder this black wire here, and you can see I got some shrink tubing on there getting ready to go. Next step here is to install the decoder to begin wiring that. Now you do need to insulate the motor, and because everything's metal, it was using the frame as a ground. What I discovered, and this is going to be a little blurry because my camera sucks, let's see if I can try to make it a little bit better. If you look here, you'll notice there's like a little shiny thing right in the center there. That's a screw that holds on a spring system. And if you look carefully here, let's see if I can get this without it. Let's see if it'll... my hand's too shaky for it to properly focus. But if you look there carefully, you'll see that there's a little bit of white on the top side there near where the red comes in, and then there's a little bit of orange where the black wire comes in. Basically what I did is I stripped this wire here, which I have connected to my little lifelike power pack, and I put that over the spring, and that now insulates the brush mounts. And then what I did is I just simply soldered those two wires on there, which will then be connected to the decoder. So this is all insulated and ready to go. So the next thing I need to do is figure out how I'm going to get power off of the track from the frame. Now, those who are familiar with brass locomotives, now this is the first one I've ever owned. Actually, this was kind of a crazy find at my work, and what I've done here is I need to figure out which frame picks up from what side. What is generally done is the tender will pick up power from one side, and the locomotive engine frame will pick up power from the other. And once again, because my camera sucks, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see there's that little like orangish tan spot. That's actually insulator, and that insulator is what holds the screw in, which holds this little piece right here, which is the connector between the tender and the engine frame, which I should know what that's called, but it escaped me at this moment. And then what that does is that connects the frame, and you have your circuit there. So what I have to do is figure out which side picks up from which rail so I can install the decoder properly. And this is actually pretty easy. What I'm going to do is I'm just take this little grain of wheat light bulb here, and I'll set the camera down, and hopefully we'll get a good view of what I'm doing, because, you know, this camera's not the greatest. And what we're going to do here, I'm simply going to turn this part right here, and it reveals the shiny brass that did not get painted underneath the weight there. And just attach the wire to one side of the track, and let's see if you can actually see the light bulb. Probably not going to show up in the camera, but whatever. And right there I'm getting nothing, so that means that we're not creating a circuit. Over here we are. So that means that this locomotive, or this tender, is picking up power from this rail. It's then going through this wire to the light bulb and coming down here. So we now know that this facing forward is the left side of the pickup, which then we should assume that this would then be the exact opposite. So we'll touch the frame here, and you probably can't see it in the camera, but the light bulb's coming out. So our right is in the tender frame, and the left is in the tender. So now what we have to do is run the proper wire. So what I'll do is I'll connect one wire into here, which I believe is going to be the black wire. I'll have to double check the diagram. And then the red wire will connect here. So because this brass engine does not have a light, and at this point I don't feel like drilling through the shell to try to install a light, the only three wires that are actually going to be connecting back and forth through here are going to be the two wires for the motor and the one wire bringing power from the tender to the engine. So this is actually going to be a fairly simple installation. Alright, so I did a stall test with the motor, and basically during the stall test the motor ended up pulling about 1.4 amps. So as for an older motor, you know, that's a bit of a high amperage for a stall test. Looking at decoders, I decided to go ahead and buy the Digitrax DH163D. And the main reason, as you can see, is it is rated at 1.5 amps, and it also has a 2 amp peak. So I should be in safe parameters for running this older motor. And then here's of course the decoder right here. And since I went through the explanation of how I'm going to connect this, I have since drilled a hole, which you probably can't see on the screen. Oh yeah, right there. See, I've drilled a small hole in the very tip of the tender, and then I've touched it up with a little bit of black engine black from Floquil. So that's drying there nicely, and we're going to begin installing the decoder. And what I've done here is I have the harness right here, and I've taken off that weight that you saw in the earlier clip, and using a Dremel with the wire brush attachment, I polished that area up. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to solder the black wire right there, and then put the plate over it, and that will give us a good pickup for the left side of the engine. And then of course you can see I have the red wire, the orange wire, and the gray wire. Orange and gray will go to the motor, and the red wire will pick up electricity from the boiler frame. And then of course I have that shrink tubing there, which I'll probably end up cutting down a little bit, but that's there. And then what we'll do is we'll shrink that all up, and that will actually be the connection between the two engines. I'm just going to do it permanently. I know some people like to put the connectors in. I don't have the, well, I do have like a couple boxes without the original box, and I really have no intentions of taking this thing apart once it's put together. So I don't really care if it's just one single cord going through. So that's what we got so far, and we'll take a look at the next clip. Alright, so we got it wired. See, I ran the wires to the tender there, ran them up to the top, and here we go. once we have the shell on and there's better contact on the front, we'll have a smoother running engine. Well, since the last video, not only did I get a new camera, you might have noticed the videos become widescreen, but I discovered that the Digitrax decoder just really wasn't going to work well in this engine because it's only picking up from the left and the right and the tender or the body of the locomotive. It just didn't have enough of a space for picking up power, and so it still ran very poorly, gets stuck a lot. So what I did some research and discovered that TCS has created a decoder. They're Keep Alive decoders. The KTM I believe is the one I purchased, and it has capacitors built into it, and that allows it to operate between 3 and 15 seconds without any power coming to the decoder off the track. So once I installed that, it has really smoothed this thing out. I mean, it still whines a little bit, it's still got the old open frame motor in it, and at some point I'm hoping to, once I have the money and the skills, to actually replace the whole drive frame, including the motor. But for what I got now, it's still working pretty good. So let's see, here we go. Yeah, you can see how it actually can, not necessarily creep, but it can run pretty slow. Really smooth. That decoder does wonders for this motor here. In fact, we've got it working well enough that I'm hoping that the next time that we run the Jackson, Pontiac, and St. Clair, which will hopefully be in October, I'm planning on bringing this engine out there. So if anybody's watching this video goes to that train show at St. Valentine, that you might be actually able to see this locomotive operating. And here's also the information for that decoder I put in there. So if anybody's interested, this is the decoder information, part number and everything. But yeah, it's the KAT22, and it's rated at 1.3 operating with a 2 amp peak. So it's still within the parameters of that motor, and so it's working really good now. This tender does not like this switch. Of course, because it's all metal, as soon as it comes off, it shorts out. There, we got her through.